Robert Perry, an article that he wrote on the 5th day of this month of this year. And here's the sentence. Saudi Arabia likes to distinguish itself from the head choppers of the Islamic State. But the recent mass executions, including decapitation of a top Shiite dissident, reveals the Saudi royals to be just better dressed jihadists. Pretty strong statement. How do you react to that?
Well, I think ISIS is basically the bastard child of Saudi Arabia. It's like a Frankenstein's monster they've created. They're just taking all of the elements we see in Saudi, the sectarianism, the sponsorship of terrorism, they're taking that to new levels. But ultimately, this is a movement that Saudi Arabia has been complicit in funding, arming, creating the conditions for it to thrive by destabilizing nations like Iraq and Syria. But it's a very dangerous game the Saudis are playing because these guys are uncontrollable, and one day they're going to devour Saudi itself.
I don't agree that all the blame is on Saudi Arabia. They are the only ones. There are few countries in that region, equally each and every one of them are to be blamed for the crisis as it's ongoing. And putting one country in the same category as a group like IS, which is just a group formed of radicalized thugs, basically, that are coming from all four corners of the world, terror and killing and stealing.
To be fair, to execute a cleric for standing up for a religious minority in Saudi Arabia and calling for elections, being executed, that's kind of thuggish and barbaric, wouldn't you say?
I do agree that this is an act which is unacceptable at any level in any country. But ideology is ideology, right? So no one really writes such a statement about the Chinese government, for example.
Now, the Saudi government, their assertion is that Sheikh Nimr was calling for the overthrow of the regime. He was more than just advocating for human rights for Shia Muslims in the east of Saudi Arabia.
I think it's very important to interject here that there is no evidence, at least I could find, my producers and other people that I contacted about doing this program, that this cleric was violent in any way, shape, or form. There was no evidence, at least it was in Western media.
This is not a singular phenomenon that is limited to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, now, but we should condemn it, though. Shouldn't it be condemned? Yeah. This is a barbaric act by a very close ally of the United States and other Western powers. Yeah. That's what makes it different. That's what makes it important. Go ahead.
We know the West would be jumping up and down if Iran had done this, or an enemy, or Bashar al-Assad had done this. If we look at Iran and Saudi, okay, Iran is a nation which doesn't go around sponsoring terrorism here, there, and everywhere, using ISIS and Al-Qaeda, sectarianism to achieve its political goals. It's a nation which has stood steadfastly against imperialism in the region. It's a nation which has stood steadfastly for Palestinian rights. It's a nation which has elected leaders, not a hereditary dictatorship. You know, Iran and Saudi, chalk and cheese. This equivalence narrative is a lot of rubbish. There is only one country in the region where sectarianism is a state-sponsored project. I mean, I've been on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, several times. You go to the bookshop opposite the Grand Mosque in Mecca, and you will see hateful literature to Shias and Sunni Sufi Muslims on sale, while these same people are doing the Hajj themselves in their hundreds of thousands. Anybody who's not a Salafi Muslim as a lesser human being, it is a state-sponsored project in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, I was just going to disagree a little bit. I think Israel also has a sectarian-based policy as well.
The Iran nuclear deal has really upset them because they want the West to bomb Iran. Basically, this whole crisis that has been deliberately engineered by the Saudi royal family, or a faction of it, in the last week, is about scapegoating Iran, because they know that a large proportion of Sunni Arabs are sectarian, are worried about so-called creeping Iranian influence.
Let's look at all the money and the arms that Iran has sent to Hezbollah. I mean, Iran is not only supporting Hezbollah, they got Hezbollah involved to support President Bashar al-Assad in Syria. They're bringing Shias from Iraq to Syria. They're bringing Shias even from Afghanistan and Pakistan to Syria, all to support Bashar al-Assad against a Sunni-led rebellion.
Well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with anything that you just said? What's wrong with that?
Well, there's quite a bit wrong with it, what was wrong with it is the uprising against Bashar al-Assad started out as a peaceful rebellion.
No, it didn't. It didn't start out.
Assad used his army. Yes, it did.
That's a myth. It's a myth. It's a myth. Okay, it really wasn't a myth. Yes,
really?
It wasn't. It was started out very violently against government officials, security officials, and then later elements of the army. No, that's just a myth. Okay, and if that regime has survived just because of its very strength and the people that follow it. That's the difference here. And this is one of the things the U.S. has grossly miscalculated, that how powerful and responsible that regime is. Yes, it is. If you like the regime in Damascus or not, it is the legitimate one recognized internationally around the world, and it's being undermined illegally by Western powers, and it has been for almost 5 years.
Saudi Arabia tried to strangle Islamic Iran at birth in 1979, throughout the 1980s, by sponsoring Saddam Hussein to attack
As did Saddam Hussein.
Iran lost hundreds of thousands of its own souls in that very prolonged war. It has vowed since then never to fight another war on its own soil. The same military doctrine that the United States has, by the way, and Western countries have. Why should they have to fight, you know, they don't fight wars on their own soil. Why should Iran? So Iran looks for buffers. It does. It looks for a sphere of influence. It has that sphere of influence in Iraq, in Syria, also in Lebanon. And those sphere of influences are there because the surrounding countries have already proved they want to destroy Iran. The fact is, if Iran was not in Lebanon, then ISIS and Al-Qaeda would take over the country. If it was not in Syria, the same would happen. Now, do you wish for that?
Many thanks to my guests in London and in Washington, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk with us.